Carl Jung once wrote something that would shock most people on their spiritual journey. He said that awakening isn't about finding peace or becoming a better person. It's about destruction. It's about losing who you think you are. Most people believe spiritual awakening means you'll finally feel calm, centered, and free from struggle. That you'll walk around glowing with inner peace while everyone else stumbles through their chaos. But Jung discovered something far darker and far more real. True awakening requires letting go of the very things we use to survive. The masks we wear, the validation we chase, the certainty we cling to. Jung documented this pattern across hundreds of patients in his Zurich clinic. He watched successful people, seemingly perfect people, walk through his door carrying the weight of lives that looked beautiful from the outside, but felt hollow within. These weren't broken individuals. They were high-functioning, admired, accomplished, but spiritually, they were asleep. Take one particular case, a woman Jung would later describe as the successful perfectionist. She had everything society told her to want: career success, a loving family, the respect of her community. Yet she sat in Jung's office describing a life that felt like performance art. Every smile calculated, every word measured, every relationship a chess game. She was exhausting herself trying to win. She wasn't depressed in the clinical sense. She was spiritually suffocating, living a life designed to please everyone except the person she actually was beneath all the performance. Jung realized that true spiritual awakening required her to let go of 4 specific habits, 4 ways of being that kept her safe, accepted, and approved of, but completely disconnected from her authentic self. The 4th habit, Jung warned, would be the hardest, because it required surrendering the one thing the ego values most. But we'll get to that. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, the carefully constructed version of ourselves we present to the world. For most people, this mask becomes who they think they are. They identify so completely with being the good person, the helpful friend, the reliable employee, the selfless parent, that they forget it's a role they're playing. But here's what Jung discovered that terrifies people. Being nice isn't the same as being whole. Being good isn't the same as being real. The persona is a necessary adaptation for social survival, but when you become the persona completely, you bury everything that doesn't fit the image. Jung spent decades studying what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, reject, and hide because they don't align with our self-image. If you've built your identity around being kind, your shadow holds your capacity for anger. If you pride yourself on being rational, your shadow contains your emotional chaos. If you see yourself as selfless, your shadow harbors your hidden selfishness. The successful perfectionist had spent her entire life being the good daughter, the good wife, the good mother, the good professional. She'd buried every impulse that didn't fit that image. Her anger became guilt, her boundaries became selfishness, her needs became weakness. She'd become so good at being good that she'd lost contact with her actual self. Jung told her something that changed everything. The goal isn't to be a good person. The goal is to be a whole person. And wholeness includes the parts you've been taught to hate about yourself. Spiritually awake, people understand something that terrifies the ego. You contain every human capacity, the saint and the sinner, the hero and the coward, the generous and the selfish. Denying these parts doesn't make them disappear, it just makes them unconscious. And what's unconscious controls you. Jung called this process shadow integration, not becoming a worse person, but becoming a complete person. Acknowledging that you're capable of cruelty doesn't make you cruel, it makes you honest. Admitting you have selfish desires doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human. Here's what this looks like in practice. When someone triggers you, instead of immediately defending your goodness, you pause and ask what part of yourself you're seeing in them. When you feel the urge to people please, you recognize it as the persona trying to maintain control. When anger arises, you don't suppress it or act it out. You acknowledge it as information about your boundaries. When you let go of the good person persona, something profound happens. You stop needing everyone to see you as good. You stop performing goodness and start choosing it consciously. Not because you're afraid of being bad, but because you're aware of your capacity for both, and you choose wholeness over image. But this creates an immediate problem, because once you stop being the person everyone expects you to be, you face the second habit that must be released. Most people don't realize they've outsourced their sense of worth. They've projected their value onto other people's opinions, achievements, social status, and approval. Jung called this the projection of worth, and it's one of the most invisible prisons in human psychology. The successful perfectionist measured her worth by her performance reviews, her family's happiness, her friends' approval. When others were pleased with her, she felt valuable. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. When others were disappointed, she felt worthless. Her entire emotional state depended on external validation. Jung understood this mechanism better than almost anyone. He wrote extensively about individuation, the process of becoming your own person, standing psychologically separate from the collective, developing an internal sense of value that doesn't require constant external confirmation. But here's what makes this so difficult. Society is designed to keep you dependent on external validation. Your education system rewards conformity. Your workplace measures productivity. Your social circles demand agreement. From childhood, you're taught that your worth comes from meeting other people's expectations. The validation addiction runs deeper than most people realize. It shows up in how you craft your social media posts, hoping for likes, how you tell stories, watching for reactions, how you make decisions, considering what others will think before considering what you actually want. You've become a performer in your own life, always playing to an invisible audience. Spiritually awake people do something that looks selfish but is actually essential. They stop asking, "What do others think of me?" and start asking, "What do I think of myself?" They stop performing for approval and start living according to their own values. Jung observed something fascinating in his patients who made this shift. They didn't become cold or disconnected. They became more genuinely connected because their relationships were no longer transactional. They weren't relating to get validation. They were relating because they genuinely wanted to. There's a psychological mechanism Jung identified called social recruitment. It's when we unconsciously try to get others to agree with our reality. We share our opinions, hoping people will validate them. We describe our experiences, seeking confirmation that we're right to feel how we feel. We're constantly recruiting others to support our self-image. When you let go of external validation, you stop recruiting. You stop needing people to agree with you, approve of you, or confirm your choices. You develop what Jung called an inner authority, a sense of self that exists independent of others' opinions. The successful perfectionist described this shift as terrifying and liberating simultaneously. Terrifying because she no longer had the safety of knowing everyone approved. Liberating because she no longer needed everyone to approve. She could finally make choices based on what felt true to her, not what looked good to others. But this creates another challenge. Because once you stop seeking validation, you must confront how you've been viewing the world itself. Which brings us to the third habit. Jung made a discovery that revolutionized psychology. He realized that when we judge others harshly, We're usually judging a part of ourselves we've denied. He called this shadow projection. We project our own rejected qualities onto other people and then condemn them for possessing what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. Think about the last time you had a strong negative reaction to someone. The person who annoyed you with their selfishness. The colleague who frustrated you with their laziness. The friend who bothered you with their neediness. Jung would ask, what part of you are you seeing in them? The successful perfectionist was deeply judgmental, though she'd never have described herself that way. She was always the first to notice other people's flaws, failures, and shortcomings. She'd mentally critique how others raised their children, managed their careers, handled their relationships. But Jung helped her see that every judgment was a mirror. When she judged mothers who seemed selfish with their time, she was condemning her own denied desire for personal space. When she criticized people who set strong boundaries, she was attacking her own suppressed need to say no. Her judgments revealed her shadow. Jung taught her a practice that transformed her relationships. Every time she felt strong judgment towards someone, she would complete this sentence. I judge them for being blank, which means I'm denying my own capacity for blank. This simple practice turned judgment into self-awareness. But judgment isn't just about other people. There's another form that's even more destructive. Blaming fate, circumstances, bad luck, or external forces for our life situations. Jung addressed this directly when he wrote one of his most famous lines. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most people live as victims of their circumstances without realizing they're unconsciously creating those circumstances. They blame their childhood for their relationship problems. They blame their boss for their career stagnation. They blame society for their feelings of alienation. And while external factors certainly influence our lives, Jung understood that we participate unconsciously in creating our reality. Spiritually awake people do something that looks harsh, but is actually compassionate. They stop blaming and start examining. They ask, what am I unconsciously contributing to this situation? What patterns am I repeating? What am I refusing to see about my role in creating my experience? The successful perfectionist had blamed her exhaustion on having too many responsibilities. But Jung helped her see that she was unconsciously taking on responsibilities to avoid feeling her own needs. She'd blamed her anxiety on external pressures. But Jung showed her she was creating pressure by refusing to disappoint anyone. When you let go of judgment and blame, you reclaim power. Not the power to control everything, but the power to respond consciously instead of reacting unconsciously. You stop being a victim of fate and start being an active participant in your life. But this creates the ultimate confrontation, because once you stop judging others and blaming circumstances, you must face the final habit, the one Jung considered the most difficult to release. This is the deepest surrender, the one most people never make, because it requires something the rational mind experiences as death. Letting go of certainty itself. The ego wants to know. It wants answers, explanations, frameworks that make reality manageable. It wants to understand why things happen, how life works, what everything means. The ego is essentially a meaning-making machine trying to create certainty in an uncertain universe. Jung understood that the rational mind is a magnificent tool, but it's a terrible master. When we identify completely with our thinking, we become trapped in the need to figure everything out, explain everything, categorize everything. We live in our heads, disconnected from the deeper intelligence of our bodies, our intuition, our souls. The successful perfectionist was brilliant. She could analyze any situation, solve any problem, think her way through any challenge. But Jung noticed something. Her intelligence had become a defense mechanism. Whenever she felt something uncomfortable, She'd immediately jump to thinking about it, analyzing it, trying to understand it rather than simply feeling it. Jung introduced her to what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox, to sit with mystery, to allow questions to remain unanswered, to be okay with not knowing. This is where spirituality and psychology diverge from pure rationality, because the rational mind demands logical consistency. It can't handle contradictions. It needs things to make sense. But life, consciousness, and human experience are full of contradictions that can't be resolved through thinking. You can be both strong and vulnerable, both confident and uncertain, both independent and deeply connected. These aren't logical contradictions to resolve. They're paradoxes to inhabit. Spiritually awake people make a shift that the ego experiences as terrifying. They move from thinking to sensing, from analyzing to experiencing, from knowing to being. They develop trust in forms of intelligence that can't be rationalized. Jung observed this in his own life during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period where all his intellectual certainty dissolved and he was forced to navigate by feeling, intuition, and direct experience. He emerged from that dark night understanding that the rational mind is a servant of consciousness, not its source. When you let go of intellectual certainty, you don't become stupid or irrational. You become fluid. You can think brilliantly when thinking is useful, but you're not trapped in thinking. You can analyze when analysis serves you, but you're not compulsively analyzing everything. You develop comfort with mystery. This is why it's the hardest habit to release, because it feels like losing control. The ego needs certainty to feel safe. Surrendering that certainty feels like jumping into an abyss with no guarantee you'll survive the fall. But something extraordinary happens when you make this leap. Jung was honest about this journey. Letting go of these 4 habits doesn't lead to immediate peace. It leads to what mystics call the dark night of the soul. A period where you've released your old identity but haven't yet found your new one. Where you've surrendered your masks but don't yet know who you are without them. The successful perfectionist described this phase as the most difficult period of her life. Without her good person persona, people didn't know how to relate to her. Without seeking validation, she felt isolated from social dynamics she'd always relied on. Without judgment and blame, she had to take responsibility for her life in ways that were overwhelming. Without intellectual certainty, she felt unmoored from everything she'd used to navigate reality. She told Jung she felt like she was going crazy, like she'd made a terrible mistake, like maybe ignorance actually was bliss, and she should have stayed asleep. Jung called this the danger of the superior function, or what he sometimes described as the isolation of consciousness. When you wake up before the people around you, you can feel utterly alone. You see things others don't see. You question things others accept, without thought. You can no longer participate in the unconscious agreements that make social life comfortable. The dark night manifests differently for everyone. Some people experience it as depression, though it's not clinical depression. It's existential emptiness. Others feel rage at all the years they wasted living unconsciously. Some feel grief for the life they thought they wanted but now realize they never truly desired. This is where most people turn back. They decide the cost is too high. They rebuild their personas, chase validation again, resurrect their judgments, cling to certainty. They go back to sleep because being awake feels too painful, too lonely, too difficult. But for those who endure this dark night, something remarkable emerges on the other side. Jung discovered that the emptiness created by letting go of these habits isn't actually emptiness. It's space. Space for something Jung called the self to emerge, not the ego self, the constructed identity, the capital S self, the deeper center of consciousness that exists beneath all our masks and strategies. When you let go of the good person persona, you create space for authentic expression. You can be kind when kindness is genuine, and you can set boundaries when boundaries are needed. You're not performing goodness. You're embodying wholeness. When you let go of external validation, you create space for internal authority. You develop a relationship with yourself that's more important than any relationship with others. Not in a selfish way, but in a grounded way. You know who you are, independent of others' opinions. When you let go of judgment and blame, you create space for radical responsibility and compassion. You can see clearly without condemning. You can acknowledge what is without needing to make yourself or others wrong. When you let go of intellectual certainty, you create space for wisdom. Not the wisdom that comes from knowing everything, but the wisdom that comes from being present with what is. You develop trust in life itself, rather than trust in your ability to control life through understanding. The successful perfectionist emerged from her dark night fundamentally transformed, not because she became a different person, but because she became more herself than she'd ever been. She described it as finally being able to breathe after a lifetime of holding her breath. Her relationships changed, not because she abandoned people, but because she related authentically. Some relationships ended because they'd been built on her performance rather than her presence. New relationships formed with people who appreciated her realness rather than her perfection. Her work changed. She stopped overperforming for approval and started contributing from genuine passion. Paradoxically, this made her more effective because her energy wasn't depleted by constant performance anxiety. Most importantly, her inner experience changed. The constant anxiety about whether she was good enough, doing enough, being enough dissolved, not because she achieved some permanent state of peace, but because she no longer measured her worth by external metrics. She told Jung something profound in their final session. She said, "I used to think freedom meant having no problems. Now I understand freedom means having no need to pretend I don't have problems. That's the shift, from performing perfection to embracing reality." Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who you were conditioned to be. And he was clear that it's not a one-time achievement. It's a lifelong practice of releasing these 4 habits again and again as they try to reassert themselves in new forms. So here's the question. Which of these 4 habits are you still clinging to? Are you performing goodness rather than embracing wholeness? Are you measuring your worth by others' approval rather than developing internal authority? Are you judging and blaming rather than taking responsibility? Are you demanding certainty rather than trusting the unknown? Leave a comment below and tell me which habit you're struggling to release. Because here's the thing, awareness is the first step. Just recognizing that you're holding onto these patterns begins the process of loosening your grip. Jung's work shows us that spiritual awakening isn't about becoming someone better. It's about becoming someone real. It's not about achieving some elevated state. It's about stripping away everything that isn't authentically you until only truth remains. And yes, that process is destructive. It destroys your comfortable illusions. It dismantles your protective strategies. It shatters your certainty. But what emerges from that destruction isn't emptiness. It's freedom. The freedom to be yourself without apology. The freedom to live according to your own values rather than others' expectations. The freedom to exist in the mystery without needing all the answers. The path Jung mapped isn't easy, but it's real. And in a world full of spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity, Jung's psychology offers something rare. A map through the darkness that doesn't pretend the darkness doesn't exist. A process of awakening that honors the destruction necessary for true transformation. If you enjoyed this exploration of Jung's insights into spiritual awakening, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into psychology, consciousness, and the journey of becoming whole. And remember, the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal isn't even to be good. The goal is to be real, to be whole, to be authentically, courageously, unapologetically yourself. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.